every time somebody talks about the South Carolina primary, they mention what percentage of the primary voters on the Democratic side are black, with the assumption then that they're all going to vote for Barack Obama. It sounds like things are changing, though. People are making up their own minds.
I think we should make it a principle that the definition of racism is the belief that the human species is divided by race. If, like me and millions of other people who don't think that, you don't think that we are subdivided as a species by race, the whole picture changes very abruptly. For example, why does someone with a white mother get called black?
Now,
why isn't his claim to be white is surely just as good as mine?
Well,
and I, by the way, have been to the National Geographic and had, as you can have for $100, my DNA analyzed. I can show you on a map which part of Africa my ancestors come from.
Now,
it actually looks like Angola in my case, but this, really the whole definition of our civil rights revolution ought to have been, and once was, that sort of thing doesn't count for a serious...
Well, I read your last Vanity Fair article. You were unfair. You said that he's a liar. I mean, everyone lies about rape. A gentleman is expected to lie about rape. Give the guy a break. We all lie about rape. We all lie about bombing Sudan when Monica Lewinsky and killing innocent people in Africa. On the day Monica Lewinsky comes to the grand jury, we all say we had to bomb that place anyway. We all do that, don't we? See how he's dragged everyone's level down. Everyone now thinks he's the average guy. A fucking rapist, a war criminal, and a pathological liar. And yeah, people then say, you can't fool me, I'm a wised-up American. I'll sit in my kitchen, and if anyone rings and says, do I have an approval rating, I'll give them one. To show how smart I am, to show how skeptical I am, to show how you can't fool me. Doesn't it make you want to bring up everything you have ever even
Christopher,
thought about
columnist Charles Krautheimer is slamming you in what he calls you're a wet-fingered conservative.
Wet-fingered
he says he's voting for McCain because he'd rather lose an election than lose my bearings.
Well, that sounds as if the bearings have already gone. Just look at what was just said. It's as if our taxes are not likely to go up, not because one candidate proposes or another. We're not babies to be talked to like this, but because the country's credit has imploded. And that was not as it happens on Barack Obama's watch. So it's childish to say promise everything to everybody like this. I want to go back to what you said about the fruit flies, because I actually think it's very important. Sarah Palin,
not funny, Lars,
jeers about this because she thinks genetics is a joke on its own and in itself. We have every reason to think that she thinks that dinosaurs lived on the Earth the same time as humans did. She certainly advocates the teaching of creationism in schools. In other words, the deliberate, planned, state-financed stultification of American children at a time when our lead in matters of science and science education is not as robust as it might be. This is a disgrace.
Larry,
it's not serious to have such a person.
The fruit flies are
in politics at all.
Let's deal with the big issues.
Yeah, she's a creationist and a religious fanatic.
Let's deal with. She's not a fanatic.
And she says she's been saved in some tabernacle in Wasilla.
Okay.
How does she know she's been saved?
Joining us live now from Washington is a writer celebrated there at that convention, reviled in other quarters, Christopher Hitchens, whose latest book is the bestseller, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Christopher, good morning.
Good morning.
So, for all the millions out there this morning getting ready for church, how do you explain to them that this country would be better off without their faith?
Well, it would be better for them if they didn't give themselves false consolation and if they didn't believe in myth and legend, not all of it harmless. It's also very important that even if they insist on this consolation, that they realize we live in a secular constitutional democracy that separates the church and the state. My new slogan is, Mr. Jefferson, build up that wall.
You are equal opportunity in taking a blowtorch to all organized religions in your book, but can you really equate religious leaders of various stripes with each other? The Dalai Lama equal to the Ayatollah Khomeini in your eyes?
No. For example, the Ayatollah Khomeini did not proclaim himself to be a hereditary god king, which the Dalai Lama does. But in other respects, the Dalai Lama is a much more civilized person. I just don't think that there are hereditary kings or gods.
You must.
I think for a human being to proclaim himself divine is a very deep form of profanity and insult.
I know that you pointed religion as the source of so much war and pain and persecution throughout history, but on the flip side of that, I'm sure you hear the argument, but think of all the good it does every day around the world, the charity, the selflessness.
Well, sure, I've seen some of it, in fact. I've met many people who live their lives in effect for others, many of them atheists, many of them believers. My challenge really is to say, can you name me a moral action that's been performed or a moral statement made by a believer that couldn't have been made by an unbeliever? I haven't yet, I've been issuing this challenge, by the way, for quite some time. I haven't had an answer to it yet, whereas I'm very sorry to say that if I ask any audience anywhere, can you think of a wicked action performed or a wicked thing said in the name of faith, no one has any difficulty in coming up with an example.
Well, if there's a convention now, there certainly must be conventional thinking when it comes to politics. Do atheists have a favorite presidential candidate in 2008?
No, they don't. There's a tendency for atheists to be liberals. It's not necessary. I mean, the supporters of Ayn Rand, for example, will probably all know that she was a libertarian atheist. There isn't certainly a candidate, no.
And if there was...
by the way, I think I quarrel with your introductory piece, which says that people say they wouldn't vote for an atheist. How do they know they wouldn't? They haven't had an offer from a decent atheist yet. And they would have excluded Mr. Lincoln and Mr. Jefferson on that basis. I don't think that's a real question for an opinion poll to be asking. If Republicans had been asked in the 70s, would they vote for a divorced ex-movie actor for president, they'd probably have said no.
Christopher, what is it in your growing up background that would make you even care to act as Little John at the bridge, keeping people from canonization or sainthood? Why would you go and testify? You just felt it was improper that Mother Teresa was made a saint, right?
Well, you know, she was a fraud and a fanatic and a fundamentalist, and therefore I think not, as we sometimes say, a good role model. She took money from Charles Keating of the Lincoln Savings and Loan. She justified the Duvalier dictatorship. She said that contraception was murder and that abortion was the greatest threat to world peace. She was a fanatic.
Don't you have to give a pass, though, to any...
Mind you, of course, you're quite right in asking me. I mean, it's none of my business who the Pope chooses to make a saint. I'm not a Catholic. But then, if I'm not a Catholic, why do I have to watch, with exceptions like you, a mass media that has for a whole week acted as if this was a Catholic country and we were all mourning our dear leader? I mean, if we're going to be treated like that, then someone has to push back and say this is not so.
Well, listen, I'm enamored of the Pope in most of the symbolic ways everybody has. He seemed like a man of peace, and when a man of peace passes, I'm saddened like anybody else in this world gone mad. My feeling is, though, that at the end, I'm adamant about this fact. If there's one reason for a church to exist, it's to protect the innocents. And we have priests going after kids in this culture, like, unbelievably. And the fact that I had an old guy in there who probably would have died if they had told him about much of this makes me long for a newer, more cranky pope who's going to walk the beat and swing the nightstick more.
I completely second those who were just applauding, but unfortunately it didn't break his heart when he found out. He knew that Cardinal Bernard Law was moving around sadistic predators, concealing their activities from the police, which it was his job to disclose, inflicting them on parishes where he knew they would attack again, and covering up for them. This is one of the gravest crimes in the calendar. This is the sort of crime that would make an atheist fear he was going to go to hell. It's the one thing no one can tolerate. Cardinal Law, who should be facing trial in Boston, is instead a fugitive from justice in Rome, given a special sinecure and a place of refuge by His Holiness the Pope. He can't get out of that. That's wickedness. It's also, in my view, wickedness to say that condoms are more nasty and more dangerous than the AIDS virus, which was the Pope's official position. It's lucky for him that he isn't going to face judgment, because if he did, he'd have a lot of people's deaths on his conscience, as well as the rape and torture of a lot of children. These are things I wouldn't want to have to go to my grave with, even if I was sure there was no afterlife. And no one will say this week. It's all piety, it's all Pope, all the time. And what about when you say man of peace? This is the guy who invited Saddam Hussein's chief henchman to the Vatican a couple of weeks before Saddam was removed, and fawned on him, and called him a man of peace. That's Tariq Aziz, another wanted torturer and mass murderer. This is a pretty grim record.
Well, Chris, you better hope so, or you're going to hell if not.
Well, all the most amusing people seem to be bound the same way.
It is a measure of the pressure the Pope is now under. A call backed by legal advisers that he should be arrested when he arrives in Britain. The instigator is the commentator and author Christopher Hitchens. He argues that in his past, the Pope was part of a conspiracy to protect paedophile priests.
There are many possible plaintiffs in England and Ireland who could ask a judge to take a view, and I think that they will. I would like to know what the Attorney General says. I mean, where are the law officers of the Crown in this?
And the argument is that the Pope should not enjoy the protection of a head of state, since the Vatican State is not an independent nation.
The Iranian president says that one member state of the United Nations should be wiped physically from the map with all its people.
Yeah.
He says the United States is a satanic power. Members of his government, named members of his government, have been caught sponsoring death squads. He's lied. He's lied to the European Union about his nuclear program.
But you know that a lot
he says he believes the Messiah is about to come back. Who's looking for a war here?
So does George Bush, by the way.
President Bush has said...
That's not facetious.
That's not facetious. Your audience, which will clap apparently anything, is frivolous.
No, I'm just saying...